Good morning. This is Miles Sewer, the facilitator of the CIO Chat, and I'm thrilled to have you at CIO Chat Live 2.0, the live panels. We're moving here from trusted operator to business co-creator and change instigator in terms of the title of this presentation. And I need to give credit where credit is due. This comes from the work of Deloitte around the changing role of the CIO. And we've discussed this a lot in the CIO chat before, so I'm really thrilled to have this panel. Before starting, I'd like to provide some background on CIO chat. CIO chat was started by John Dodge of IDG, CIO Magazine. It's a Twitter chat that happens on Thursdays between 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A few years ago, we were asked to start putting on events like today, and so we became a nonprofit 501c3 focused on two things: CIO education, and second, STEM diversity scholarships, mentorships, and internships. We ran our first event last year at Boston College, and our next in-person event will happen at Georgia State, superseding this virtual event that we've done this year because of all the changes that have happened out there. And I'd like to thank Boomi for being our sponsor at CIO Chat Live, the virtual edition. You were critical to making this happen and be successful. We have a board that helps me formulate the agenda and topics that we'll talk about at these events, including who should be speakers and keynotes. And as you can see, we have a variety of experiences here, from Quikrete and the American Cancer Society to Adobe, to a variety of folks who are in higher education. And this first panel, as I've indicated, is going to be moving from trusted operator to business co-creator and change instigator. It's facilitated by Jay Ferrero, who I'm thrilled to have do this. And along with him comes Cynthia Stoddard from Adobe, Isaac Sikolik, who is an author and former CIO of Business Week, and Dion Hinchcliffe. Dion is, I call him the enterprise architect extraordinaire, and is an analyst at Constellation Research.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We have everybody online. We have Cindy, we have Isaac, we have Dion, yes, and we have Kamalika. I mean, everybody's here?
Good. Everybody except for Kamalika, so she must have had technical difficulties, but you've got the main core of the panel, so.
Well, good morning. So, you know, the notion of moving from trusted operator to business co-creator and change instigator is something near and dear to, near and dear to my heart. I feel like I hear at CIO events, I read articles, and I hear CIOs lamenting that they still, in 2020, which is hard to believe, don't have a seat at the table. In other words, they are still considered a back office or an operational resource to the company, but they are not viewed as a business co-creator. They are not viewed as a source of innovation or a change agent within the organization. What, in your experience, is still holding? I think we hold ourselves back more than organizations hold us back as CIOs. However, I'd love your opinion on what is still holding us back as CIOs from becoming co-creators and change instigators and being thought of that company-wide.
So I can start, Jay, if you'd like me to start. Put some thoughts on the table. I have to agree with you. You know, a seat at the table just doesn't come. It has to be earned. And unfortunately, I think people just expect the seat at the table to just arrive and be there. You know, as CIOs, you know, we have to, you know, first and foremost, you know, get down to the basics and make sure things are reliable, running, that our projects are executed on time, that our staffs understand the business, and that, you know, we're bringing ideas to the table. So I think it takes a bit of time, when you join an organization or, move into the CIO role to actually build up that credibility in that respect. And that comes by just not talking. That comes by doing and showing what your organization can deliver and the value that you can add to the business. And it can start in small chunks. It can start with things like, on-time delivery of projects, or looking at the business value of projects and making sure that the technology projects truly, do line up with business objectives and help out. But I would say I'm in the same camp with you, is that the seed is there. You just have to really show that your organization can participate and add that business value. CIOs are in a unique, and I say CIOs, when I say CIOs, I mean the CIO organization, because it's the CIO plus their organization, is in a unique position to look horizontally across companies and make recommendations on how to optimize business processes, how to use data, how to digitize, how to do a ton of stuff, how to employ new technologies. But we just have to build up that credibility and start sharing, and you build that up by demonstrating the value that you and your organization have.
I think that's so well said. Isaac, Diane?
Hey,
All right.
I'm finally there. Hey, Jay, it's Isaac.
Isaac, how are you?
Uh,
NY Ike, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. It's funny, your question, because I actually just wrote something on this that hasn't been published yet. I
When you
think
didn't
it.
call me about it, I'm hurt. So,
I will. I need a quote for it. Um, I think it's a, I think it's a two-step problem. I think, when you look at what the CIO has to be doing to get really involved, it really comes down to getting involved. I wrote a post about 2 years ago about how CIOs spend their time. And, if you want to be perceived as a business leader, you need to be spending your time with your business colleagues, with your customers, within your operations, with your CEO and your CFO, with key people and across the organization that are change agents that want to do things differently. And that takes a significant amount of time out of a CIO's day to be able to go do those things. If you look at your, 50, 60-hour work week, and you're spending less than half of your time uh, engaging outwardly in some fashion, with business, with customers, within markets, within operators, then you're just not going to be seen as a co-creator. You're going to be seen as somebody who's just managing an IT function, and then different people have different perceptions about what the scale and scope of an IT function is. So I think you have to get out of your comfort zone. Many of us are introverts. Many of us have grown our skills through being engineers and developers and working our ways up in the IT areas. And, we have to switch gears and be out in full force. And that's a little harder now doing it remotely, but that's what needs to be happening to that seat. I think the other side of it is, quite frankly, I find that business leaders either want to partner with technologists or they don't. And I think those numbers have increased over time as, digital has become more important and technology has become more important. But let's face it, you don't get yourself invited to the party without the person throwing the party wanting you to be there. And so there's still some
yeah.
organizations that are just IT is there to make sure the email is running and make sure the website is up and running and all the technologies are operating. And those organizations, it's just really hard to be co-creators in. But I just think the numbers have been increasing significantly, and I think with the disruption that we're all facing, if there's any CIOs listening to this that have not gotten their quote unquote seat at the table, now's your chance to grab it, because business continuity, 5 years ago, we were talking about keeping, VPN up and running and access to file systems and email, really basic stuff. And now when we're in business continuity mode for a month plus, obviously we're talking about the entire operations running. We're talking about figuring out what customers need differently than what we're doing today and how to change the operation for the current times. And so if you're not a co-creator yet, now's the time to step up and reach out to people and see how can you help them.
I agree. I think right now is a great time to flex our respective muscles as organizations. And I agree with both everything you both said. I feel like consistent delivery and consistent visiting of your customers and learning and understanding how value is created with your organization is something that a lot of CIOs don't do consistently. And they may come in the first 90 days, they're meeting and greeting, they're having meetings and showing their stuff and developing a keen understanding of what's going on in the company. But I think as you get mired in operational challenges, because the laundry list as a CIO, it is always growing, there's more demand than supply, it's easy to get into a rut and all of a sudden fall back into old keep the lights on mode. To Cynthia's point, you have to do both. There's not, this notion of, hey, I'm a transformational CIO versus an operational CIO. No. If you're a transformational CIO, you're still, to me, a world-class operational CIO. You've got to do both. I mean, nobody wants the guy on the baseball team that's batting 190 just because he's great in the locker room and is super nice and is patting everybody on the back and he's a terrific cheerleader. What you want is somebody who's batting at least 275 and not making errors. So that consistency of delivery, keeping the trains running on time, et cetera, is absolutely key. Dion, are you with us? Do you have a thought?
Dion might need an organizer to unmute him.
There we go. Hold on. Let's see, because I know Dion has some strong thoughts on this. Hopefully we can get his thoughts. If not, we'll continue on. All right, I keep seeing him going from mute to gray. Dion, are you there? All right, so we've talked a little bit about delivery. Isaac, you talked about the role being primarily, and often I think you're right, introverted. I mean, right now we're in the middle of something that is a once in a generation or once in a century kind of situation. What tips do you both have? And Isaac, you touched on it a little bit. Right now we're in the middle of this. What is your advice to CIOs right now to show that they have command of what is happening in their businesses and how it's impacting their company's value chain?
Yeah, I'll suggest two things. First thing I think is that if there's a business leader as a CIO that you have not reached out to over the last 4 weeks, that you haven't had a one-on-one dialogue with, this is the time to start doing that. Just checking in, how's your operation going? What are your pain points? What are you hearing? What do you need? Just having that one-on-one conversation to build a relationship up if you haven't built one up yet, or to just get some new perspectives over what's important today versus what was important a month ago. I think that's the very first thing that I would do in a CIO seat, is just start having those one-on-one, one-on-two dialogues that you can still do through, phone, through, Zooms and what have you, to get that perspective and get a new voice of customer, get a new sense of what's going on that needs to be prioritized. Therein lies the second thing. When I think about the staff and the employees, every organization I've seen overloads their employee base with too many priorities, with too many things to figure out. We're all running around from one meeting to another. And, let's face it, when you're working from home and you got kids bouncing against the wall and you're doing some homeschooling and maybe you're dealing with some sick colleagues as well, you just cannot be juggling 5, 6, 7 different priorities. The best things organizations can do is be very clear with their employees about what their number one and number two priorities are and how to stay focused and who they should be working with. And so if you put these two things together, what should we be doing now as CIOs? Number one is rethink what the priorities ought to be by going back to your business colleagues and figuring out what's most important this month and for the next month. And then reorienting the priorities with the IT staff and saying, we need to realign these things that we were doing before, we're going to put on hold. We're going to go revisit them when things return back to status quo. And these are the things that are going to make an impact in our business over the next month. And be very clear about what individual assignments are around them.
I think that's well said, Cynthia.
Yeah, I would agree. Doing that pulse check. I mean, that's one of the things that did very shortly after is, when I reach out to all different areas of the business to see, okay, so maybe people can sign on and do email, but we have a lot of other activities, that need, of course, to keep the company running. Are people able to do everything they need to do from home, right? And are there special things that maybe we need to accommodate, either in the engineering organization or in finance or, wherever, so that people can be as productive. So I think that reach out is really important. And what that reach out also does is, it goes back to that sense of confidence. It helps with communication, because communication during this time is extremely important. But it also gives you information where you can start anticipating really next steps. Because with something that, like what we're going through right now, we need to plan, of course, for the very short term and make sure everybody's productive. But we also need to be thinking about, what's coming around the corner, and if this is long term, or if this is going to come back, or if, what are our next steps going to be? Because we need to start anticipating and, looking for what those long term, different ways of working solutions are, and how are we, prioritizing? How do we, juggle, the priorities for the rest of the year going forward? How do we bring organizations and customers and everything different so that, companies can continue to function, and everything is a little bit different. So I think that, the communication and the reach outs help for today. It helps with the, with what we need to do as leaders, but also provides us that base of information where we can work with our teams to really, look at scenario planning and think about what are the next steps that we're going to think about, in a month or 3 months or 6 months.
Awesome. I agree. I feel like you both touched on some very important concepts, not only reacting to the crisis in front of us, but also showing that forward-looking aspect of what we can learn and what we can, and I wrote down, Cynthia, anticipating, because I love that word. I mean, just what do we anticipate? What are the opportunities down the road? And I said something on a call the other day, and it generated a little bit of discussion. I said, I hope we don't have short-term memory when this is all said and done. I mean, we all want to go back to normal. We all want to go back to the office, hug our family, visit, go to a sporting event. I do more than, as much as anybody else. But the reality is that we as Americans, or we as a world, tend to have short-term memory after a big natural disaster, or after and I think for the most part, that's a good thing. We put it behind us, we learn from it, we kind of adapt and then move on. I'm hoping we take this as an opportunity to rethink and reframe some things about how we work as organizations. And I think as CIOs, and it's not just about business continuity, it's about getting the company confident with new ways to work. It's about new ways to reach our customers. So I hope there are positive lessons to be learned here that are enduring beyond just, hey, Jay did a really good job because all of our folks were able to, access the VPN remotely, or, get into resources they needed, which, by the way, is extremely important, but I hope there are some more strategic lessons to be learned. Cynthia, when I first joined, late, of course, I thought I caught the tail end of you saying something about, you know, kind of license to innovate. And I caught the tail end of it, so I'm probably going to butcher the living heck out of this, but it was something about ideating or ideas or fail. I don't know what it was, and I feel like when you're moving from a trusted operator to business co-creator, there has to be, of course, a license to fail within the IT organization. But I have found also, and I'd love your opinion, and Isaac, your opinion. To me, and you both, Isaac, you touched on it too, the notion of quick wins, the notion of ideating, the notion of proofs of concept and prototyping. I know I've had great success in many different CIO roles where when my organization has command of how our company works and how we make money, how we generate revenue, how we operate, how we service our customers, how we acquire and nurture those relationships, I find that the ideas begin to flow, and in giving them license to create and bring ideas forth. And I can't even count the number of times where we've had, whether it was a mobile app or a technology or a process improvement or something like that, where we've brought it back to our colleagues outside of IT, and they kind of looked at us and said, didn't know you guys could do that, didn't know you knew about that, didn't even realize that was a problem. How fast can we scale it? Have you experienced that?
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. I totally, I totally have experienced that. And it's interesting, you know, and I'm just going to go back to the ideation part a little bit, because as you were talking, I was thinking about something. You know, we as CIOs, we need to give our teams time to think and time to experiment. You know, so many great ideas come, from the floor, from the grassroots. But we need to be able to say, it's okay for you to try stuff out. And to your point, Jay, it's okay for some of it not to work. As long as we learn from it, as long as we learn from, the areas that don't work. And, I've challenged my teams in many different roles to, hey, what do you think about this? Or, is there a technology that could potentially do that or whatever? And they have come back with some totally amazing ideas. And to your point, yeah, present it back to the business. It's like, well, we didn't know you could even think about that, or you would do it, or blah, 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 blah. And but now it gets to the point where, they're kind of knocking at your door saying, what do you think about this? Right. Is there somebody in your group that could maybe experiment and let us know the outcome? So, again, it's building that relationship and then demonstrating what, ideas you can bring to the table that are actually real, as opposed to just saying, hey, I want to be a partner to the business, and I want to add value. Well, show me the value. And that comes with, freeing up time for your teams to work on different things and letting them learn new technologies and letting them bring in different technologies or open source and, have at it and figure out, solve a business problem.
I think you're right. Being very intentional about it and not just leaving it to chance and assuming that they're going to do it, but also recognizing it and kind of uncovering it and showing the rest of the IT organization when there are those wins that they do have permission to do this stuff. And we are putting in a framework for ideation, experimentation, tinkering, et cetera, and that you're encouraging it. Isaac, what do you think?
Well, look, if I looked at what the heart of my business continuity plan would be, it would include how we're operating with agility and how we're using agile processes to actually move the business forward incrementally. I think it's very powerful now that, teams that aren't locked into 3-month plans or, 1-year budgets and are looking at things from the lens of a sprint and saying, not only are we going to commit to getting something done in a short, finite period of time, but we're going to put some balance to it. Talk about being a co-creator. We have a vision over what we need to be doing, and we're adjusting that vision to our time. We're allocating part of our work to experimentation. In agile terms, sometimes we use the word spike to suggest that the work we're doing might fail. It might not yield a business result that we're seeking. We're also balancing against technical debt. Talk about short-term memory. I'm sure we're all discovering things in terms of how we're operating today that point to deficiencies in our legacy systems, deficiencies in how we operate as a group, communication breakdowns. All those represent some form of debt that we can put into our backlogs and think about new solutions around. And I think, in terms of trying to become that trusted operator, if you look up the makeup of your agile teams and you only have technologists on the team, this is the time that you can address that, right? Go talk to people who, when you have that conversation with a business leader, ask them who should be on this team from their organization if you're working on something. And not just put them on the periphery and call them a stakeholder, but actually give them a business or a data or an operator or a marketing role directly on your agile teams, and let them feel the community around what they're trying to accomplish and work together. Let them understand how to prioritize, that we can't sign up for an infinite amount of work every sprint, and let them figure out how they can collaborate on solutions. So I think this is a great time for organizations to truly expand their scope and notion of what agile is, to be able to, really pivot in terms of their priorities, but really come up and collaborate in a very different way. And Jay, I'll just end, you mentioned we shouldn't have short-term memories. There's an aspect of agile that really talks about we want to have co-located teams to give us the best collaboration and productivity that we can have, and we know that to be more or less a fact, right? If we put the right group of multidisciplinary people in a physical room together and set them on a vision and give them empowerment to self-organize and solve solutions, they're going to go pretty far, pretty fast. That is no longer the world we live in. And so I think, if we come out of this, finding ways to make remote work more acceptable and more ingrained into our organizations, I think is the one thing I hope we don't lose from this.
I think that's, I think that's well said. We touched on earlier that as the role changes and as we're working across borders within our organization, there's going to be obstacles, right? Not everybody will get religion. We build allies across the organization, and I know in my experience in coming into a new company, you obviously look for those areas where IT can plug in very quickly, and you build those relationships. But Isaac, I think you mentioned it, to your point, not everybody's going to get that, right? You're going to run into folks who, for whatever reason, and it has nothing to do with age or longevity, or they just don't see IT as anything more than a utility.
Yep.
What do you do when that individual is in a critical role, perhaps the CFO, perhaps the COO, and they may not have anything against you as a human being, but they simply don't see the value in having you as a leader, and not necessarily you, but you as an IT as an IT leader, quote, at the table or in the boardroom. I'll throw out an idea and something that has worked for me, but I would love your opinions on A, how you tackle this solution, and B, just kind of what you think about the way I handled it, and you can shoot me down, I promise. So I had this experience at a very large organization where, for whatever reason, this individual and I just were oil and water. It was very professional most of the time, but there was passive aggressive behavior, and no matter what I did or how I approached it, it was there was either not necessarily confrontation, but there was just obstacles thrown up. And so I made a decision after consulting with my team and my mentors and other CIO leaders like yourselves. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to die taking this hill. There's no sense in beating my head against the wall. I'm going to continue to nurture and strengthen the relationships around this individual. But what I did is I built strong relationships at this individual's direct report layer, and we started to deliver for that organization. And then lo and behold, over time, there were no allies for this person to kind of lean on and go, gosh, can you believe this CIO guy who comes in here and tries? Because this individual's direct reports are now going, yeah, they're doing a great job, and they've really got some good ideas, and we've never gotten this much out of IT before, and they're terrific. And then this individual looks over to their peers and says, well, can you believe this CIO? And they're going, yeah, no, I think it's terrific. And over time, I wore the individual down where it was never a buddy-buddy relationship, but at that point, they were on an island. Have either of you ever experienced a situation like that? And other ideas for how to approach that?
Yeah,
Go
go
ahead,
on,
Cynthia.
go on, Isaac. Go on.
No, Cynthia, go ahead. I just spoke.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say yes, I have. I think that your solution, Jay, is absolutely brilliant. It's great. One of the things that I did when I was experiencing that is I created a 2 in a box. So this individual and myself, we had to do everything together. So if there was a effort being launched, a business process change or anything, it was 2 of us. So we both had to speak. And at first it was a little bit uncomfortable, but in order to get in front of a group of people, you had to be committed to something. So either you weren't committed publicly or you were committed publicly. So I did that for every initiative for probably about 18 months. And then the individual came around and was a believer in IT. So I just went directly to the person. I didn't go to the people underneath me.
Well, and what you did though was very smart. And I think that the key takeaway there is you were very intentional, and you put up with, for lack of a better term, the pain or the discomfort or the awkwardness of being with somebody who maybe didn't see you didn't see eye to eye with. And over an 18-month period, you wore them down with delivery and building that relationship. And at the end of the day, it worked, right? And I think there's a terrific lesson there for consistency and endurance for a leader, not to just get frustrated after 30 days where Jay walks in or Isaac walks in or Dion or Cynthia and we're, well, what do you mean? Look at this PowerPoint. It's amazing. I mean, how do you not see how great this idea is? and then get frustrated and say, immediately dismiss them as an obstacle and work around them versus continuing to nurture. So I think there's that's wonderful that you had that kind of endurance. I suspect you have way more endurance than I do when it comes to doing that. So kudos to you, Isaac.
Jay, I think anybody who has tried to push the envelope in their organization in some fashion, taken on some kind of transformation role, is going to find one or multiple people that fits your description, right? Maybe one is aligned in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, but really wants to take the reins and run things themselves, and work around IT and work with their own providers. Dion likes to say we have the biggest budget, we have the biggest staff. Sometimes that's true or not true. But if you're not pushing the envelope, if you're not trying to drive change, you're not going to see this. If you are, you're going to face people who would rather have more control over their own destiny, that would rather get things done themselves. And you're going to find other people who are just very happy to partner with. So, your suggestion of, working around them and working to the mission, I think is a great, it's one of the ingredients, right? Don't solve the person, solve the opportunity or solve the problem. The person will come along at some point, whether you have a hand in that or not. I think that's a very strong suggestion. I think a part of this is also recognizing that when you're driving transformation and you're starting out with a small group, part of what you need to be able to do is market to your successes and own up to your stumbling blocks. I think that's part of getting more people on board with your way of working, with your approach, with your honesty and transparency. So I think as you do have some successes, being able to showcase them, I think is very important, and part of that program. I think it's an interesting time also to ask that question. One of the things I advise CIOs is, there's way too many opportunities out there. And if you have somebody who's really just throwing you under the bus all the time, and you can't build that relationship with their direct reports to solve the problem, go hunting elsewhere, go work for another business unit or go work in another area. We all have too many priorities. And I think that worked well until about a month ago, because the reality is, there are parts of the operation that are mission critical today. And if the wrong person's at the helm of them, you still have a duty to your shareholders, to your executives, to your customers, to your employees, to do the best you can to make that function work. And so, the best you can do there is, go the 11th yard, go as far as you can to make whatever problem, whatever opportunity successful, and recognize that you're probably not going to get credit for it. You're probably going to get thrown under the bus while you're trying to do certain things there. But if it's that important, that person is in charge of it, you're going to have to find a way to make something happen there.
I agree, and I know we're coming up on time. We only have a few minutes left, so I want to be mindful of that. But Isaac, you touched on something that I think is very important, and I've talked to a number of CIOs that I think probably have done the right things, and they've maybe followed a lot of the principles that we've discussed today, and they still can't make progress. I feel like at some point you just kind of have to pack your bags and maybe move on to another opportunity. And obviously right now, given everything that's going on in the world, I wouldn't recommend that right now, although there are still significant opportunities out there. However, I feel like in some organizations, you get one shot at life, you get one shot at your career, and it may be time just for a change in scenery or a different voice. Or a different audience. But as we wrap up, I'd love your final thoughts and final tips for that CIO who's on the cusp and is looking at themselves saying, look, I feel like I'm delivering. What are those things, those 2 or 3 little tidbits or nuggets that you want to share with them that they can put into action? Let's put the pandemic aside just for a second, which is hard to do, I guess. But what are those 2 or 3 little quick hits or nuggets that you want to give them that they can take away as they become a business co-creator or a change instigator that they can go put into action?
Yeah, you need to build up Jay. You need to build up a story there, right? So you might not get the partnership that you're looking for to actually drive transformation, but transformation is built up by a series of small wins. And as a CIO, you probably have a number of those things happening in parallel. So, number one is go after a number of small things in your organization where you can call them your wins and your ways of moving the organization forward. Also look for them outside of your organization, right? I started my, writing over 10 years ago, not really with a strategy, but it was at that time saying, I've learned a bunch of things that I think people can learn from, and I just started writing a blog about it. Other CIOs get involved with nonprofits, right? Other CIOs can share their learnings through a mentoring program. So if you can't demonstrate your leadership and your knowledge and your skills 100% in your organization, look outside of your organization for other opportunities and build up that storyline. So when there are better opportunities, you have a good story to tell in terms of what your accomplishments are.
So those are great. I would just add a couple of points. Focus on the customer. You know, always put the customer first and understand what their needs are, what their pain points are, because that is really, really critical. To put yourself in their shoes and try to see it from their point of view, and then have empathy. You know, when you're dealing with your internal, customers and those that don't see the value of IT, try to understand why. You know, where is that person coming from? Do they have a bad experience at one point in time? You know, are they, are they uncomfortable with technology or uncomfortable even just communicating? So, I would say that those are the two additional points I would add is, put yourself in your customer's shoes and have empathy.
I love it. I love it. And that's why you two are both world class. And with that, I think, Miles, we are coming up on time. So I want to be respectful of your schedule, but I want to thank Dion, Isaac, certainly Miles and team, and Cynthia for an amazing panel. Thank you for putting up with some of our technical challenges this morning. As always, thank you to our audience for tuning in. And Miles, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I want to also thank you and our panelists. We have managed to have every technical difficulty, including bandwidth and things like that, from the provider GoToWebinar. But with that, I think some of the things I heard were amazing and important. And I've been seeing people on Twitter be chatting about the points you've made. We did have one question, but we don't have time for that at this point. But I want to just remind everybody that there is the second webinar that starts at 12 o'clock Eastern, so in a couple hours. And we look forward to seeing you there as well. And thank you all for coming.